So picture this, it's September 2nd, 31 BC. Two enormous fleets are about to collide off the coast of Greece. But here's the thing, the winner wasn't just going to win a battle, he was going to win the entire known world. This is the story of that exact moment, the fight that literally forged an empire.
You know, if you really want to understand the next 1,000 years of history, you have to get what happened here, in the waters off Actium. This wasn't just some skirmish. This was the brutal, dramatic finale of a civil war between two of Rome's biggest titans, and it became the very founding moment of the Roman Empire.
So, how on earth did it come to this? I mean, these guys were supposed to be on the same team. Well, the story really kicks off with the death of one man, the one and only Julius Caesar, and the massive power vacuum he left behind. Two men, both with incredible ambition, were ready to fill it.
All right, so you've got two main players in this drama. On one side, you have Octavian. He's Caesar's young adopted son and, crucially, his sole heir. And on the other side, the legendary Mark Antony, Caesar's best general, a real military hero. You can see how both of them felt they had a solid claim to Caesar's legacy and, of course, the loyalty of his unstoppable legions.
Now, believe it or not, these guys were actually allies at one point. They teamed up with another general, Lepidus, to form what was called the Second Triumvirate. Think of it as a three-man dictatorship designed to hunt down Caesar's assassins and run Rome. But as you can see from this timeline, it was always, shall we say, a partnership of convenience. The cracks started showing pretty early, and by 33 BC, the whole alliance just fell apart, paving the way for the ultimate showdown.
And this is where things get really juicy, where the personal gets intensely political. Antony had actually married Octavian's own sister, a woman named Octavia, to seal their alliance. But then he just abandons her. He packs up, moves to Egypt, and starts a very public, very political alliance with its powerful queen, Cleopatra. Back in Rome, this was seen as a massive betrayal, not just to his wife, but to Rome itself.
And this was the real spark that lit the fuse. See, Octavian's entire claim to power, his whole identity, was based on being Caesar's one true heir. So when Antony and Cleopatra get up and declare that her son, Caesarion, who was Caesar's actual biological son, is the true king of kings, well, that's a direct attack on Octavian's legitimacy. Antony wasn't just trying to share power anymore, he was trying to wipe Octavian off the map completely.
So with the battle lines officially drawn, both sides launched this vicious propaganda war. They were desperate to win over the Roman Senate and the people. You could say this was a war fought just as much with rumors and accusations as it was with swords and shields.
Octavian's propaganda, you have to admit, was brilliant. He played on these deep-seated Roman fears, their terror of kings, and their suspicion of anything foreign or Eastern. He painted Antony as this traitor who was completely under the spell of an Egyptian queen, a guy who wanted to move the Roman capital to Alexandria. Antony, for his part, fired back, calling Octavian a power-hungry tyrant who'd illegally kicked out their partner Lepidus and was hoarding all the land and money for himself.
And then, Octavian pulls off an absolute masterstroke. He somehow gets his hands on Antony's will, totally illegally, by the way, and publishes it for everyone in Rome to read. And the contents? They seem to confirm everyone's worst fears. It supposedly left huge chunks of Roman territory to his children with Cleopatra and asked to be buried in Alexandria. The public outrage was instant and absolutely massive.
This move just shows you how smart, how clever Octavian was. He knew another civil war between Romans would be super unpopular. So what does he do? He gets the Senate to declare war, but not on Antony. No, they declare war on Queen Cleopatra. This brilliantly framed the whole thing as a patriotic war against a foreign threat, and it legally stripped Antony of his command. Just like that, the stage was set for battle.
All right, so all the political maneuvering, all the backstabbing, all the propaganda, it all comes down to this one day, the final, epic confrontation in the Ionian Sea, right near a place called Actium.
So let's break down the two sides, shall we? Antony had fewer ships, but they were enormous quinqueremes, basically floating fortresses, so think of them like heavy tanks. Octavian, whose fleet was actually commanded by his genius admiral Agrippa, had way more ships, but they were smaller, lighter vessels called Liburnians. These were like armored cars, way faster and more maneuverable. And maybe most important of all, Antony's crews were weak from desertions and disease, while Octavian's men were well-trained, well-rested, and ready to go.
And you know, things were looking really, really bad for Antony before the first oar even hit the water. Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, had completely outmaneuvered him, cutting off his supply lines from Egypt. His army was totally trapped. So the Battle of Actium wasn't some grand, planned engagement. For Antony, it was a desperate breakout attempt. He literally had to fight his way out or his army would starve. The battle raged on for hours. Antony's huge ships were tough to sink, but Octavian's smaller ships just swarmed them, and it became a real stalemate. And then, something absolutely unthinkable happens. Right in the middle of the fight, Cleopatra's squadron of 60 ships, which had been held back in reserve, suddenly raises its sails and just flees the battle, making a run for Egypt. And this, right here, is the great mystery of Actium. Why did she leave? Was this some prearranged escape plan all along? Or did she just panic? Honestly, we'll probably never know for sure. But what happened next is beyond dispute. Mark Antony, seeing Cleopatra's flagship sail away, just abandons his command, hops on a smaller, faster ship, and follows her, leaving his entire army and navy to fend for themselves. And the effect? Oh, it was just catastrophic. With their commander gone, morale completely evaporated. Antony's fleet was surrounded and totally destroyed. But the biggest blow came a few days later. Antony's huge land army, we're talking nearly 100,000 men, surrendered to Octavian without even putting up a fight. In a single afternoon, Mark Antony lost everything.
The battle itself might have been over, but the ripples from Actium were about to change the world. You could say the final act of the Roman Republic had just ended, and the first act of the Roman Empire was about to begin.
About a year later, Octavian cornered Antony and Cleopatra in Alexandria, Egypt. Hearing a false rumor that Cleopatra was already dead, Antony fell on his sword. He actually died in her arms, a tragic end for one of Rome's greatest ever generals. Cleopatra herself would take her own life just a few days later. And what about the victor? Well, Octavian returned to Rome with 0 rivals left. None. He now held absolute, uncontested control over the entire Mediterranean world and every single one of Rome's legions. The century of civil war that had torn Rome apart was, at last, over.
So what does he do with all this power? Well, he very cleverly and carefully starts taking apart the old republic, piece by piece. First, he consolidates all the important powers and offices into his own hands. Then, in 27 BC, a grateful Senate gives him a brand new name, Augustus, which means the revered one. And with that, he becomes the princeps, or first citizen, which sounds nice, but in reality, he was Rome's very first emperor, beginning an era of imperial rule that would last for centuries. But Octavian, or as we should call him now, Augustus, wasn't about to let anyone forget this victory. Oh no! In 29 BC, he founded a brand new city right there on the battle site, and he called it Nicopolis, literally the city of victory.
And on the very hill where his camp once stood, he built this massive victory monument. You can still see these cuttings in the stone today. They once held the ultimate war trophies, the actual bronze rams ripped from the front of Antony and Cleopatra's captured warships. It was a permanent, terrifying reminder of who was now in charge of the seas and the world.
So when you boil it all down, Actium was so much more than just a big naval battle. It was the end point for the Roman Republic and the official birth certificate of the Roman Empire. One man's victory ushered in a century of peace, the famous Pax Romana, but it came at the cost of those old Republican ideals.
And that kind of leaves us with this big, complicated question, doesn't it? After 100 years of these brutal civil wars that had just ripped the Republic to shreds, was having one man in charge, an emperor, an inevitable, maybe even a necessary price to pay for stability and peace? Or was it the tragic death of liberty? That right there, that's the complex legacy of the Battle of Actium.